All right, the vote for what many on Capitol Hill consider to be the most influential chairmanship in the financial world is taking place next week. Two names are being floated as the top contenders. Congressman Andy Barr, a member of the Financial Services Committee, is one of them, and he joins us this morning. And Congressman, thank you for being here with us this morning. Most people see you as the frontrunner to this. Want to ask about what your plans for the Financial Services Committee would be if you take that chairmanship.
Well, good morning, Becky. And on Election Day in November, the American people sent a very clear message, and that's that the country's on the wrong track and they want change. They want a better, brighter, more prosperous future for themselves. They're tired of inflation and they're tired of an economy that's left them behind. And while it's true that the stock market is at all-time highs and unemployment is down, the fact of the matter is inflation has made life very hard for average Americans, especially Americans who live paycheck to paycheck and are not invested in the stock market. And that's why Republicans control the House, the Senate, and now the White House with the election of Donald Trump. So we have to deliver. We have to deliver on bringing price stability back, lowering the cost of living, and then unleash this economy. We need to give this economy the jet fuel so that wages exceed inflation and prices. That's our goal. That's our mission, to restore the American dream through the power of free market capitalism.
Well, you've described yourself as somebody who wants to marry the Trump-style populism with the free capital view of the world. And I guess I wonder what that means just in terms of the actual bills you'd be putting forth and in terms of the regulations that you'd be pursuing. We've heard about things like a credit card cap to make sure that you can't charge more than 10% interest on credit cards. That would seem to be something that on the face of it would limit bills for average Americans, but I know that's not something you agree with. What do you agree with? How do you get at that?
Well, you know, free market capitalism is America first. Free market capitalism is what made America great in the first place. And you know, we don't have to choose between Wall Street and Main Street. We need both, and they need each other. And so that's why I think I can build a bridge between those traditional Chamber of Commerce, Wall Street Republicans, and the America First populists who elected Donald Trump. We will work with this administration, and the impulse of lowering interest rates on credit cards is good, because the reason why Americans are using credit cards, the reason why Americans are going into debt and have all-time high credit card debt and are maxed out on their credit cards is because of inflation under 4 years of Joe Biden and Democrat policies of overspending. So the impulse is right, but the truth is, price caps and regulations are not an America First strategy. The America First strategy is competition and choice. More competition and choice, more free markets, more economic liberty. That will give Americans the financial prosperity that they deserve and that they need, and that will actually lower costs and lower the cost of credit. So that's what we're about, is competition and choice and unleashing our capital markets. And when lenders compete, prices and the cost of credit comes down. That's what we're going to be doing.
Maybe where you agree with some of the populism a little more is where it comes to the Fed. You have said you're in favor of Fed reform and Fed accountability. What does that look like? What's wrong with what the Federal Reserve is doing right now?
Well, you know, I had breakfast with Fed Chairman Powell yesterday. I think he's doing a good job. We're at the precipice of that soft landing. But I told him the reason why the election results came out the way they did was that the American people are not satisfied with where we are on inflation. And let's not retarget inflation above 2%. Let's get that down to 2%. He committed to me that the Federal Reserve Board would be focused on getting us down to that 2% target. But the truth is, lowering the rate of inflation will not lower prices. We actually need to grow the economy. So we talked a lot about regulation, and we've got to stop this Basel III endgame that would really punish our banking sector and make it less competitive. I actually went to Basel, Switzerland, and visited with the Basel Committee that put out their proposal for harmonizing bank capital rules across the world. And they admitted that the Federal Reserve gold-plated their proposal. They went way beyond, the Fed went way beyond what even the Basel Committee and the Europeans were proposing. We need to make our banks competitive.
Congressman,
Yes, well capitalized.
let me just,
but the banks are well capitalized.
Let me just go through this point by point. When you say you want Fed Chairman Powell, and you told him you want him targeting 2% inflation because that's very important, I mean, that sounds to me like you don't want him to continue cutting rates, and that sounds like it's in direct opposition to what incoming President Trump will want.
No. What I'm saying is, obviously, we do want a normalized monetary policy and gradual reduction of interest rates. But we obviously, and there's quantitative tightening that's going on as well. Don't forget that. That is restricting money supply. That will also bring down the cost of living. Really,
but if we are not at 2% yet and they are cutting rates, the natural argument would be they shouldn't be cutting rates. They should be waiting until we get to 2%. If we're at 2.5%, if inflation numbers come out between now and the next rate cut next week, should they not cut rates if inflation's above 2%?
I don't think they should. But remember, inflation is not just a product of monetary policy. There's also a fiscal policy element to it. And I discussed this with Chairman Powell as well. We in Congress need to unleash supply. We need more supply of labor. We need more supply of energy. We need more supply of capital. Supply will lower prices. And that will give the Fed the flexibility then to gradually lower rates, normalize policy, get to that neutral rate, and that will lower the cost of credit. So we have a role to play in Congress. The Fed has a role to play. And that's the goal, is ultimately to lower the cost of living for Americans, but also to make sure that wages rise above the cost of living. That's also why we need a pro-growth agenda.
Yeah, Congressman, a couple of your colleagues wrote a letter to the Journal today talking about some of Judy Shelton's comments that President Trump should be more forceful in influencing some of the things the Fed do. And it sounds like that influence should be about a rules-based approach that really is less, puts less weight on one of the dual mandates and more on inflation is what you're talking about. But one of the interesting things that actually they quote Judy Shelton on, 62% of the gain in U.S. household wealth over the past 4 years went to the top 10%. Which is what I've been saying for years, that when you keep rates at zero because of crappy policies that cause, these transfer payments and things that don't spur growth, the Fed ends up at zero, and then everything accrues to the wealthy. And what the left says they want to shrink the income gap, they're actually making the income gap worse by policies that exacerbate, and allow the Fed to be at zero. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's true. It makes absolute sense, and it's very true. And what you have to remember is that half or more than half of the country is not invested in the stock market. We need more people invested. We have a savings crisis in this country. There's not enough people who have 401ks because they don't work for a big company. They work for they're self-employed, or they're working for a small business, and so they don't have a 401k. So we've got to fix the savings crisis in this country to make sure that Americans have access to that miracle compound interest.
Are we going to hear that Trump is trying to tamper with the independence of the Fed? Is that going to be the end result if we do hear a lot of jawboning? I mean, all presidents have done that, but there are already people that assume that he's going to do that. They're already clutching their pearls about how that's going to happen. I see it every day.
Well, I don't think there's an argument for removing the Fed chairman. There may be an argument for the vice chair of supervision, because it's a regulatory executive position versus the chairman of the Federal Reserve. But here's the major point, is that the Fed independence should not be confused with a lack of accountability. The Fed is a creature of Congress. We created the Federal Reserve Act. And so this idea of Fed independence, they can't be held accountable, that's wrong. We need to hold them accountable. And so when the Fed enters, for example, when the Fed enters into these international agreements with the Basel Committee in Europe or the Network for the Greening of the Financial System, there shouldn't be Fed independence. They should be accountable to the American people through their elected representatives in Congress. And so, yes, there should be Fed independence with respect to the conduct of monetary policy. But the idea that the Fed should be totally unaccountable, that's wrong. The American people deserve a democracy where they have input into their government. And so the Fed should be accountable to the American people through Congress.
Congressman Barr, thank you for your time, and we'll speak to you again soon, we hope.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky.
Thank you.
We'll see. Yeah, the letter was written by French Hill, who also is vying for. Who's going to get it? This guy?
Don't know. I'm not voting myself, but.
Do you have a preference? Coming up, one's from Arkansas. He's from Kentucky. I looked at where he was. He's from the 6th district, just south of Cincinnati. Coming up, way south, another streaming service.